quite possibly the dirtiest motor race I have ever seen in my life. Maybe a bit of a dramatic opener, but to be honest, the Saudi Grand Prix, where do we even start with that? It was a mess from the start. Both teams, Mercedes and Red Bull in my opinion, playing dirty tactics from the get-go. Off the back of what seemed to be a swing of momentum to Mercedes' dominance in Qatar, Saudi certainly looked to be going the same way, and Red Bull knew that they needed to keep at least the fight going to the end of the season. Going into the race weekend, it was Hamilton on pole, knowing that if he beat Verstappen, finishing first and Verstappen was second, he would go into the final race of the season on equal points. Now, if anything good came from this race weekend, I think it was at least that. Going into the final race of the season, we do have a dramatic fight on our hands. It is literally going to be, may the best man in the best car at the time win. We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end as we look ahead to Abu Dhabi next weekend. But certainly I think that's one positive we can pull from the weekend. A real shame for Perez as well, retiring from this race. It kind of ties up the constructors. It's going to take a monumental Goliath effort for Red Bull to manage to close in that points gap next weekend in Abu Dhabi. I think going into the next race weekend, everyone's pretty much confident on who's going to take the constructors. I think it will be an 8th for Mercedes now. But all eyes are going to definitely be on the drivers, especially after this race weekend. I'm going to go off the bat and say it. I am very disappointed in both teams and how they handled themselves during the race. I think both teams played dirty tactics. I think both teams should have been penalised a little bit more than they were penalised, that's for sure. And teams were getting away. Both teams got away with things they shouldn't have got away with. Kind of want to pretense that because, you know, everyone has their opinion. Everyone has the driver and the team they want to see win and those they want to see do better than the other. And that's completely fair enough. That's what makes this sport fun. That's what makes having these conversations fun because, you know, I try and be as unbiased as I can be in these videos. Obviously, there's a slight, I'd prefer things to go one way than the other, but, you know, I try to be as unbiased as I can in these videos and kind of look at everything from all perspectives. But I got to admit, I didn't enjoy this race. It was a shame because it overshadowed the new circuit. What potentially could have been fun, but in my opinion, way too dangerous. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But I just feel like both teams, both Mercedes, both Red Bull, both Hamilton, both Verstappen, all went into this race weekend kind of under the impression that they just had to do whatever it took to beat the other guy. It didn't really matter what the rules were or what the dealing was or whatever, so long as it got done and they came out on top, it was fine. I didn't like that at all. I didn't like the way that Mercedes were using Bottas. I mean, there was a whole thing about Bottas slowing after the safety car came out to give Mercedes the window of time they needed to do the double stop, right? That didn't get investigated because of everything else that happened in the race. But when that happened, that was ridiculous and dangerous. And I think the point of the matter is, whether you support Hamilton, whether you support Verstappen, whether you support Red Bull, whether you support Mercedes, it genuinely doesn't matter. If they're driving dangerously and the standard of driving is dangerous, that's when it's gone too far. And I just think this race, everybody went too far in the top two teams. I don't know, we'll never know whether Red Bull would have tried to utilise Perez in a similar way to Mercedes utilising Bottas. All I do know is my resounding feeling coming out of this weekend was both teams went too far. Both drivers went too far. Everyone was too obsessed with beating the other guy no matter the cost. And that really, really was felt. And I will talk about it now because it feeds straight into this as well. It was a new circuit, not a problem. It was a street circuit, also not a problem. It was a very quick circuit, not a problem. But combine those three and we're into a very dangerous mix of scenarios. I personally think the Jeddah circuit is way too fast and way too tight. There is a reason that Monaco is not driven as quickly as others. There's a reason there's so many hairpins and chicanes and things to slow that track down. because if the drivers crash into those barriers or go off the track, it is too dangerous, and the ramifications of those incidents could be much worse there than in other circuits. We saw this both in free practice when Charles Leclerc had an incident, and also in the race, which brought out the red flag with Mick Schumacher having an incident as well. They were not nice incidents to see. Luckily, both drivers wandered out of those perfectly fine and no incident, and that was great. But the problem was, I just think it was too dangerous. It was too quick for a street circuit. If it had more runoff, if it had, more room for error at speeds this fast, then fine. Okay, they are professional racing drivers. If you give them margin for error and they fall into it, then that is okay. It feels, it feels safer, if you will. Obviously, you don't want to see anyone have a high-speed crash, but it feels safer when they've got ounces of runoff or gravel traps or grass or whatever to slow them down. And I'm not saying the circuit wasn't safe. Of course, it was FIA homologated, which means all of the tyre barriers, all of the barrier protection that was around the circuit had to be to a certain standard, or they wouldn't have been allowed to go racing. The problem to me remains, I just feel like it was too fast. Too tight, too narrow, too fast. There is a reason Monaco doesn't have Monza speeds. And there is a reason Monza is not as tight and windy as Monaco. Speed versus tight and no room for error just doesn't go well together in my mind. As far as I'm aware, we're back at Jeddah again in next season, in 2022. Hopefully they'll have slowed it a little bit, if I'm honest. Hopefully they'll shove a couple of chicanes in there. They can't really increase the runoff, although to be fair, half the circuit wasn't built. They did a very good job on TV of covering that up, by the way. So hopefully next season, we get into it and it's a little bit slower. I appreciate wanting to be the fastest circuit on the calendar, but it just felt like a whole weekend of too much. Just too much. Just everyone just calm the hell down, please. Everyone take a breath and let's move on, okay? I'm not going to go into the incidents one by one. Everyone has their opinion, and I'm sure the comments section or the coffee pot down below will be populated with people sharing their opinion on certain things that happened. I'm not going to go into them specifically here. I feel like I've covered kind of my whole attitude and feeling towards all of them in that brief section there. If you want to carry on talking about them, do go down the coffee pot below. Please be kind to each other. Remember that just because someone doesn't support your driver or your team doesn't mean they're wrong. Try and be educated when you give your opinion. Don't just yell things at each other, right? Let's try and make it a nice space to have a good discussion about this stuff. I am aware, getting close to the end of the season and coming off of the back of this race, which does make people worried about next race, I fear we're going to get into some contentious areas this weekend and next. So try and be kind to each other. Try and keep it mutual down there. I don't want to have to start shutting off comments. I don't want to have to start stopping people from commenting, right? That's the last thing I want to do. I want to go down there and have the discussion with you as well. So please be courteous to each other. Remember, there's a human on the other end of the screen as well. Just think about what you're saying before you're saying it. But please, if you have any more thoughts and feelings on any of that stuff with Mercedes, with Red Bull, with Verstappen, with Hamilton, drop them down in the coffee pot down below. I will continue the conversation there. McLaren seem to be slowly making a surge back. Not a great race, well, not a standout race for Ferrari this weekend. A fairly neutral one for them. They're fairly happily sitting kind of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th at the moment. That seems to be where they're sitting. A good race for them is obviously 5th, 6th. So not a bad haul. They came 7th, 8th. Leclerc ahead of Sainz. Ricciardo was 6th though, starting to pull in a few points on the Ferraris. I mean, Ferrari got a nice leap in the constructors. Honestly, again, that's another one I think is kind of done and dusted. McLaren have got to have a lot go right for them to get that back off of Ferrari. Now Red Bull having to do a lot to get that back off Mercedes. It's a real shame Perez went out, because I do think we could have had a really neat fight next weekend, both for drivers and constructors, but alas, I fear we're all going to be focusing on one thing. I've done the top 10 in a weird order, sorry about that, but let's just jump back up to 4th, and what a great drive from Ocon, trying to follow in Alonso's footsteps from Qatar weekend before this. A great 4th for the team, Alpine. I mean, they're nowhere near the fight for McLaren and Ferrari for 3rd in the championship for sure, but they're really starting to nice and stably take that 5th, and they don't really seem to be having a threat from either AlphaTauri or Alfa Romeo behind them either. So it seems like Alpine have solidly got 5th now. Obviously there's still one race to go and a few points still up for grabs, but I think the bottom end of the top of the constructors, sorry, is pretty solid. I mean, we all know Haas is coming last. Sorry, Haas. That's just the way it is this year. And Williams as well, probably down there with them. So I feel like the next fight for 5th is pretty done as well. To be fair, most of the constructors is pretty done. But yeah, a good race from Ocon, showing that Alpine has got some pace in it. I'm obviously don't think it's anywhere near the Mercedes in terms of straight line speed, which, by the way, where is that all suddenly coming from? Didn't think all of these circuits would suit Mercedes in that way. So after Ocon, as mentioned earlier, Daniel Ricciardo was 5th. I think I said it was 6th, my bad. Earlier, but 5th was Daniel Ricciardo ahead of Pierre Gasly. Again, another one that just pops up. Very solid performance from Gasly as per usual, racing there for 5th for AlphaTauri, getting some good points for them. But again, as I said, I think Alpine is a bit too far ahead for them to be able to take 5th off of those guys. Then the Ferrari duo, 7th, 8th, Leclerc, Sainz, followed by a good race for Antonio Giovinazzi to take home 9th, and Lando Norris coming along across the line to finish up our top 10. McLaren really do seem to be struggling these last few races. Not really sure what's happened to them. Ferrari's kind of settled into its own, and McLaren seem to be they've definitely fallen behind slightly in the last few races to keep that fight going for the constructors towards the end. But all in all, a pretty good fight perceived between those guys towards the end for the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi. Looking ahead to Abu Dhabi, obviously we've got the slightly different configuration for the next race as well. The circuit's kind of been sped up a little bit, which in terms of how the performance is going at the moment does look like it's going to suit Mercedes more than Red Bull. If I had to put money on a driver coming out on top next weekend, I would have to put my money on Hamilton. I think that Mercedes and the pace they've got at the moment is just astronomical. I have no idea where that straight line speed's come from, but since Brazil, they've kind of been untouchable. I don't know. I think it's very much going to come down to if Verstappen can start ahead of Hamilton and keep him behind. I think then we're in for a good shout, because that's going to very much be a game of strategy, and all this, that, and the other. But if Hamilton starts ahead and gets ahead, I just think the pace of that Mercedes is going to be too much for Red Bull to close in. The Red Bull are very good at their strategy, so we shall see what they can do next time out. As I mentioned, there's not really a great deal of other fights going on for the constructors. There is, the best of the rest is still quite closely contested between a few drivers, so to see who will come out on top of those drivers will be interesting. What is interesting is in that fight is both Ferrari drivers, which I suppose makes sense considering that car is 3rd in constructors, but when you think about the season Ferrari's had, it just feels a little bit up and down, really. They don't really seem to have many breakthroughs, though I suppose they have had a couple of podiums sneak in there, haven't they? That is all we have this time off the back of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. As I said earlier, please let me know your thoughts, feelings, and comments about this Grand Prix down in the coffee pot down below, and let me know your predictions for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Who do you think will come out on top? We've got a cracking race on our hands with both drivers coming into it on the same points. First time since the 70s that has happened. It's gonna be lightning tense unless one of them drives away with it at the start, or hell, one of them drives into the other. Let's hope neither thing happens. Let's hope the race next weekend is super tight, super entertaining, and hopefully not controversial at all. And we've got a lot of great fun things to talk about next time. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some Formula One love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video! We'll see. We will see.